The forum Boarium smelled of damp stone and cattle dung. Beneath its open sky, 3 pairs of armored men stepped into a makeshift arena. They were not soldiers. They were slaves, trained to fight to the death, not for glory, but to honor the dead. This was 264 BC, and Decimus Junius Brutus Scaever had just buried his father. To mark the occasion, he staged what the Roman historian Livy later recalled as the first recorded gladiatorial combat in Rome. This was not yet a public spectacle. It was a funeral rite, what Romans called a munus, a duty owed to the deceased. The combatants bled not for sport, but as a solemn offering. Yet this private ritual, rooted in the Campanian custom of human sacrifice at tombs, soon took on a different shape. In southern Italy, especially in cities like Capua, these bloody rites had already begun to change. The Samnites, Rome's former enemies, had long hosted warrior duels during feasts to the dead. Over time, ritual killing became ritual combat. The death itself became less important than the struggle. It was, as the Christian writer Tertullian later observed, the spilling of blood for the sake and satisfaction of the dead, but one that increasingly entertained the living. By the late 3rd century BC, these duels were moving from funerals to festivals. No longer confined to mourning ceremonies, they appeared in Rome's growing roster of ludi, games sanctioned by the Senate. Initially religious in nature, the Ludi Romani were held in honor of Jupiter, often during times of crisis. The Senate, fearing divine wrath or seeking divine favor, would vote to fund them, making the games a matter of state, not private grief. This transition, from familial ritual to civic performance, was subtle but irreversible. By the end of the Republic, temporary wooden arenas gave way to stone amphitheaters. What began as a somber rite in a muddy forum had been absorbed into the Roman state, codified, scheduled, and publicly funded. And so, with each drop of blood spilled in the sand, the state itself was writing a new kind of law, one not inscribed in tablets, but in stone. Gladiators forced to fight starving beasts. The iron gate groaned open, and silence fell over the crowd. From the shadows of the arena tunnel, a lone figure emerged, barefoot, carrying nothing but a short blade. Across the sand, the cage door rose. A lion, ribs pressing against matted fur, stepped out into the sunlight, starved, alert, and coiled with hunger. This was no duel. It was an execution, staged for public thrill. By the 1st century CE, Roman arenas had become theatres not only of human combat, but of man's forced confrontation with wild beasts. Known as venaciones when staged as hunts, or damnatio ad bestias when used for executions, these spectacles were designed to blur the line between punishment and entertainment. The condemned, criminals, prisoners of war, and sometimes even rebellious slaves were thrown into the arena against lions, leopards, or bears, often weakened by hunger, to ensure a swift and violent end. The practice had earlier roots. By the late Republic, generals like Pompey had realized the political power of spectacle. He famously orchestrated shows in which men were cast against animals in elaborate displays, scenes where blood offered both punishment and applause. Some were trained fighters, bestiari, forced or paid to battle wild animals for the crowd's amusement. Mosaics and stone reliefs from the early empire depict such scenes with grim detail. A figure with spear raised as a lion lunges, a netcaster dodging the claws of a panther. One relief from the 1st century CE shows a fighter eye to eye with a charging beast, caught mid-motion in sculpted terror. These were not fantasies. In Roman Britain, archaeologists unearthed the pelvis of a man, likely a gladiator, scarred by deep bite marks matching the jaw of a large feline. The wounds told their own silent tale. He had died locked in combat with a lion. Across an empire, from the Colosseum to provincial amphitheatres, this ritual of blood played out again and again. Seneca, writing in the 1st century CE, recalled how some prisoners would kill themselves before their appointed spectacle, rather than suffer a death meant to entertain others. Their refusal was silent rebellion, a final act of control in a world designed to strip them of it. What unfolded in the arena was not mere violence. It was calculated degradation. Hunger was sharpened into a tool. Beasts were starved not only to ensure death, but to amplify suspense, to keep the crowd holding its breath as man faced claw, fang, and fate. Naumachie, Rome's deadly water shows. The water glistened under the Roman sun, calm for only a moment. Then drums thundered, war horns cut through the air, and two full fleets surged toward each other across a man-made lake. Soldiers stood on triremes armed with spears and catapults. Below them, thousands cheered, not from riverbanks, but from stone bleachers. This was not war, it was entertainment. Rome called them Naumachii, mock naval battles fought not in distant seas, but in carefully engineered basins, often dug by imperial order. Julius Caesar staged the first in 46 BC. Near the Tiber, he had an artificial lake excavated to reenact a battle between Tyrian and Egyptian fleets. Real ships, real weapons, and real men, condemned prisoners, who fought not as actors but as soldiers with no hope of survival. The spectacle grew. Augustus, Caesar's heir, constructed an enormous basin in 2 BC, measuring 1,800 by 1,200 Roman feet. So vast, it required its own aqueduct, the Aqua Alsietina, to fill it. On those waters, 30 warships clashed, each manned by convicted criminals, numbering in the thousands. The scale was staggering. The message was clear. Rome could command not just armies, but nature itself. Sometimes the water shows moved beyond artificial lakes. In AD 52, Emperor Claudius drained a mountain lake, Fucine, and celebrated with a Naumachia. The fighters greeted him with words etched into history. Morituri te salutant. Those who are about to die salute you. Whether those words were scripted or spontaneous, they captured the raw fatalism of men sent to die for public amusement. By the time the Colosseum opened under Titus, Naumachie had become synonymous with imperial grandeur. Some historians believe he may have used Augustus's basin nearby for naval battles during the amphitheatre's dedication. Later, under Domitian, similar games were possibly staged within the Colosseum itself, its arena floor temporarily flooded to host miniature maritime carnage. Even under Trajan, a century after Caesar, the tradition endured. He constructed the Naumachia Vaticana in AD 109, a massive flooded arena near the Vatican Hill, where more battles of spectacle and death played out before roaring crowds. Each Naumachia was more than a performance. It was a demonstration of total control, of water, of men, of empire. In these choreographed wars, Rome didn't merely reenact conquest. It recreated domination as ritual, drawing power from the illusion that war could be staged and still remain absolute. By the time of the Colosseum's grand opening in AD 80, executions were no longer merely punitive. They were theatrical. Emperors, beginning with Titus, used the midday break between gladiator matches to stage mythological tortures. These were not symbolic dramatizations. They were real deaths designed to mirror the agonies of legendary figures. Martial, the poet and eyewitness to those inaugural games, recorded what he saw. He described an Orpheus figure entering the arena to enchant wild beasts with song. But unlike the myth, where nature bends to Orpheus's music, the arena's animals were uncharmed. One of the most disturbing reenactments was the myth of Pasiphae, the Cretan queen cursed to lust after a bull. Roman crowds witnessed a woman, or possibly a condemned man disguised, thrown to a beast in a twisted imitation of her fate. The performance blurred boundaries between myth, punishment, and voyeurism. Fire, too, played its role. The tunica molesta, a pitch-soaked garment, was fastened to the condemned and set ablaze. Sometimes this was framed as the death of Mucius Scaevola, the Roman hero who proved his loyalty by holding his hand in fire. Whether the victim played Scaevola or another fiery martyr, the result was the same: screams drowned beneath applause. Tertullian, writing as a Christian under Roman rule, bitterly described how victims were burned alive, tied to posts, and mocked as actors in a play of torment. "We are mocked as kindling men," he wrote, recounting executions where men were turned into living torches, pain masquerading as moral spectacle. These mythological tortures weren't about storytelling. They were control, wrapped in ritual. Rome didn't just kill. It made death an echo of divine punishment, giving the audience not justice, but a perverse form of catharsis. And so, as legends were resurrected in blood and flame, the boundary between theatre and execution collapsed. In the Roman arena, myth was not read, it was relived. Rome's arenas turned ritual into policy, spectacle into statecraft. Blood on sand, water and flame forged a culture that measured power by the choreography of death. Their echoes still haunt every debate on violence and entertainment. Which spectacle, funeral duels, bestial hunts, naumachia, or mythic tortures, best exposes Rome's control over life itself? Comment below with your insight. As Seneca wrote